Hello, everybody. I'm about ready to start this show. If y'all are ready, type a little something in the chat if you can hear me, please. I want to make sure that my microphone's working for everybody here. Can you hear me today? Excellent. Awesome. All right, so we're going to do basically a marathon session today, y'all. I spent a long time getting all these slides together. It's going to be an Olympic event, but we're going to get through it, okay? So hold on to your seats. It's about to get real here. All right. You can't hear or see anything. Let's see. Refresh your screen, your browser. That might help. Okay. So, close that mess. I don't need that out there anymore. Okay. Well, Unit 4 is going to be at the very end. So the presentation itself is about an hour long. I'm going to try to go through it as quickly as I possibly can. There's a few things that we're going to glance over. We're going to try to get through all of it today. Let's make sure this happens quickly. So if you have questions, feel free to type them in there. I'll try to get to them as quickly as I possibly can and as efficiently as humanly possible. Okay. Before I begin, thank you guys for coming tonight. Of course, you can find us throughout all of the social medias here, our Twitter account, Instagram, and the YouTubes at Think5able. I appreciate y'all being here tonight. It's been a very fun semester. I'm hoping you guys have been enjoying it so far. So here's what I want to go over. Okay, tonight we're going to go over the first 4 units: the living world ecosystems, the living world biodiversity, populations, and in the last one, the most recent one, Earth systems and resources. Okay. So the first one, let's talk about ecosystems. Probably the same things that you guys learned back in junior high. I'm sorry, Denise, you can't connect. I don't know why. It does not make sense to me. All right, so the way I talk to I teach also freshman biology. So when I start talking about interspecies relationships, again, inter meaning between, I use smiley faces. So here's my little emoticons up here. Do you guys know the first one, if both species happen to be happy? Mutualism, wonderful. Yes, it is mutualism. Okay. I go with happy and meh. What do you got there? Happy meh. Mutualism is the easier one because we can have a mutual friend, something that we have in common. The meh one is commensalism. If one organism is happy, they're probably getting something out of this, but the other one is sad. We call that parasitism, which is very different from the last one is predation. Okay. One's happy because it got fed, and the other one's sad because, or the other one's dead because it was the food. Now, we can also have interspecies relationships with competition, or it could actually be within a species itself. So the things that you could compete for usually are mates, food, water, shelter. Any one of those could be within the species. Between species, it could just be those last 3 right there, of course. So one of the ways that different species could make it so that there's less, pains of competition, because competition could be good for the ecosystem, but it could also be bad. Bad in the fact that there's a lot more stress. So in order to alleviate some of that stress, we have what's called resource partitioning. And so on this lovely little trees right here, even though it's one tree within that forest, there could be a species that only lives at the top of the branches of the tree itself. There could be a species that lives near the middle section. And then there's a species C that lives near the bottom. And so now, again, they're sharing the tree, but they're not actually competing. And you can see this with different types of foods too. Maybe one eats like the leaves, one eats stems, and one eats the actual fruit. Not a really good example. I don't know of those things that happen. But again, you can see that they're still sharing the area, but now there's less competition. So there's less stress. All right. So I told you this is going to be really quick tonight. So Again, if you have questions, please, please, please type them in there. I'll try to get to them as quickly as possible. I don't know how to help people go on and reconnect, but we'll try our best. And Sarah, should be about an hour tonight. All right, so let's continue here. Terrestrial biomes. Again, nothing much different from what you probably learned freshman year or even in like junior high. If you'll notice, that is not what I want to do. All right, if you notice on the screen, you can see that mostly these are forming in bands around the planet. So they're not exactly latitudinal lines here, but it's pretty close. You can see that the majority of the deserts in one certain area are rainforests and areas, and then grasslands and such. So we can see that they're divided out. When we talk about air currents, you can see that these match up very well with some of our Hadley cells and such. It's not a static system. We have a very dynamic system right here. It's constantly changing. Even where I live in the middle of the U.S., we can see that a lot of our grasslands are starting to die away. We're getting more of what we call desertification, the removal of grass and basically dying out. A lot of our trees on the East Coast are gone compared to what they were like 200 years ago, or even just 100 years ago. And we see this now being slowly replaced by grasslands. Even that glacial melt, we're finding islands that we had no clue about near the South Pole, and they're already starting to be inhabited. So again, it's not a static system. It's very dynamic. It's constantly changing and has changed over time, numerous times. Another way to look at it right here, these all the biomes, not only terrestrial but the aquatic ones, they have very similar flora and fauna. Okay, and it's due to the fact that they all have very similar climatary conditions. Okay. All right, how am I doing so far? You guys, am I going too fast? Or am I going just right? It's great. All right, thanks, Reed. All right, awesome. Thanks, y'all. Okay, I just want to make sure this is meaningful, but not too ugly here. Yes, Dana, there are images here. But if you're subscribers, then of course you can see the stream another time. You can look at whenever. If you're not a subscriber, again, just try to refresh your browser. Maybe even just reboot. I'm not sure, but I gotta keep going. But at least listen in. So I'm trying to describe everything we got going on here. Now, aquatic biomes, not much difference here. Okay. You have your freshwater ones, which we're more familiar with, here on land, lakes, rivers, streams, ponds. Of course, that freshwater is our source of drinking water. That's why it's very important to us. We don't get a lot of food out of it. Then we go into the marine ecosystem. So your oceans, your coral reefs, marshlands, estuaries. And I have a little asterisk next to marshlands and estuaries because they are the transition between that fresh and marine systems. A lot of important things happen in there. You have lots of different cleaning abilities of the water and fish hatcheries, natural fish hatcheries. The oceans themselves are, of course, a natural source of food, oxygen, and it's a carbon sink. So we'll talk about that here in just a few minutes. The oxygen, of course, comes from the algae. They are the major source of our Earth's oxygen. And the way that the marine aquatic ecosystems are divided is actually because due to different depths. You can see, here's my little flash right there with that photic zone. It only goes down to, at maximum 200 meters. And then below that, you don't have enough sunlight. So they have to find different ways to have their food chains and food webs going on. All right, let's continue on one point farther, carbon cycle. I'm not really super cool about going through the whole carbon cycle. It's very long, but if you basically understand that all these cycles are about recycling nutrients. This one specifically is carbon, not necessarily carbon dioxide, but just the chemical carbon itself, the molecule. It's mainly done through photosynthesis. Plants make the thank you, Blaine. Plants will make our sugars, and then we will use cellular respiration to break up the sugars, and we will release carbon dioxide back into the air, which the plants take in. Also, you notice on our on our image right here, there's what we call sequestration. The numbers on the screen are very large for like fossils and soil, and of course the ocean. They're going to store a lot of our carbon dioxide, and it's slowly being released into the atmosphere by human use. We're putting more out there than what is naturally within the cycle. The cycle is being kind of constant and steady with a few dips and dives here and there, climbs and dives. But because of the release of the carbon through fossil fuel use, we're adding more into the atmosphere. All right. So, of course, sequestration is short-term within the plants, the trees, and all that. Long-term within the oceans and fossil fuels. 1.5 nitrogen cycle. A lot of stuff on here is highly confusing, even to me, and I'm a biology teacher. I'm going to straight up tell you, not my favorite cycle at all. So let's make it really easy for everybody out there. What you really have to know about the nitrogen cycle. Again, cycling of nutrients. The majority of our nitrogen is going to be in the air. Okay, actually 78% of our atmosphere is nitrogen. Bacteria are the most important portion of this cycle. Bacteria are going to be able to take atmospheric nitrogen and make it into a compound that plants can use. Okay, don't worry if it's nitrates or nitrites. If they even ask a question, it'll be one out of a lot. But if you can remember, bacteria are going to basically make a nitrate, NO3, that the plants will assimilate into their system. And then from there, of course, that's how we get our nitrogen. We'll need it for our proteins and our DNA. The only way that we, animals themselves can get nitrogens is by eating plants. We can breathe air all we want. We're not getting any of that into us. All right. Okay. Thumbs up, thumbs down. Are you guys good so far? I'm going to pretend you are. All right, let's keep going here. I'm hoping everyone's good to go. All right, phosphorus cycle. This one's really rather nice compared to the other ones. This cycle is the only one that does not interact with the atmosphere itself, which is nice. It is all land and water based. I do appreciate y'all basically replying to me. That is great. I do appreciate that awesomely. Lets me know that I'm not just talking to a camera. So again, it's because there's no atmospheric component to this, it's very difficult to put it back onto land. So we'll see a large pooling of it in the waters themselves. And that's when we can find out something called eutrophication. It's a limiting factor on the terrestrial and aquatic ecosystems. But when you have an overabundance of it in certain areas, then we can have eutrophication, which basically can lead to fish death. Too much of that nutrient, in this case, could be phosphorus. It could also be nitrogen. Builds up, have an overgrowth, and when they start dying, all the oxygen is used. Water cycle. Here's the thing. It is no difference from what you guys learned in the 5th grade. All right? Water goes up in the air, comes back down, rinse and repeat. The only brand new term would be basically infiltration. That's when the water soaks into the ground. You have what we call groundwater, and it can also come out into lakes, streams. This is where you get like well water, okay? So no difference in here whatsoever from what you learned back in elementary school. All right, so we're going on. We're not going to worry about that one. All right, primary productivity. This was actually my first stream with Fiveable. Such good memories. So primary means the first productivity, making of something. We're going to take our sunlight. 99% of that sunlight is not even going to be used. So what do we have left? That 1%. We're going to call it GPP, gross primary product. And that right there is all the energy that plants are going to be able to produce for the whole ecosystem. Now, here's the thing. Plants have to use some of that energy for themselves. Respiration. So GPP minus respiration is now net primary productivity. That's all that is actually left for the ecosystem, okay? So MPP is all that's left. It's your net profit. GPP is what your gross profit was minus respiration, the cost. So again, MPP is your profit. GPP is all the money you made minus what you had to spend for your workers and overhead, okay? Relatively basic algebra right there. They can ask you one, or they give you two, and you just have to come up with a third. Very basic. What you have to understand again is it's like about approximately 1% of all the sunlight from the sun goes into making that. All right, trophic levels. Again, food webs, food chains, that ecological pyramid right there at the very bottom of our producers. We just talked about they make all the energy for all the rest of them. So if you're not a producer, you're a consumer. All right. Primary in this case means the first, secondary, second, tertiary, quaternary. Okay. We tend not to go above the quaternary because there's very, very little energy up there. Now, you want fancy names for producers? Autotrophs. Basically, auto is self, troph is food. Self-food or self-feeders. Okay. This does not mean they basically make their own peanut butter and jelly sandwiches like my students try to tell me, my freshmen. This means that they can actually make food for themselves within the body. Now, other fancy words, heterotrophs or different food. That's all your consumers. They have to get their food from a different source. And then, of course, herbivores and carnivores. We can't have the omnivores on here because that would have to show that they eat both plants and animals. And in this pyramid, that's one of our limitations. Oh, all right, there we go. Sweet. So, 10% rule. Again, freshman year when you're talking about this, probably in your biology class. 10% of that energy is transferred. 90% is going to be lost as heat. We say heat, it's lost of different things, but for our test, it's lost as heat. So if that base, where the keystone species fall, actually any one of these things could actually be a keystone species. They'll be a little bit more apparent when we come to food webs and food chains, but basically a keystone species is they're so needed by the remainder of our ecosystem that the removal of them could cause the ecosystem to fail. And most times you're going to see them to be a little higher up. Oh, wait, I clicked on the wrong button. My bad. Thank you for the question. I do appreciate that, Vanessa. So again, we lose 90% and only 10% is going to be transferred on each level up there. Okay. This 10% rule is not just energy. It's the amount of biomass, number of organisms, and such. Okay. Is there a formula or any math related to the 10% rule? There has been. Basically, that what they'll say is like if you happen to have 4,000, kilojoules of energy as a primary consumer, how much energy would you have as a tertiary? And because of the 10% rule, if you just move that, I'm trying to make sure I'm moving it right. If you just move the decimal off to the side, just like you were multiplying divided by 10, then you'll be able to get that. Thankfully, y'all do get to use calculators now. I'm not really sure if that's a good thing or a bad thing, but again, you're just dividing by 10 each time you go up. And that's how much energy is at that level. Okay. Sarah, that answer your question for you? Not a problem. Okay. So again, when we talk about food webs and food chains, that kind of goes back to that ecological pyramid. A food chain is just a single string of organisms. One feeds the next. Okay. Food web is where they're all interconnecting. Food webs is where you get to actually see omnivores and such. Okay. So in here, the keystone species, I would say on our image right here, it's probably going to be that fox at the very top. I'm assuming that's a fox. Even though he's at the top, if we remove him, now there's an overabundance of snakes. There's an overabundance of these squirrels and that. I'm not sure how a fox eats a bird, but you get the idea. If there's too many of those foxes, too many of the snakes and squirrels, now they're eating too much of the food below them. So we can see problems with that. There was a very famous study from Yellowstone when they put the wolves back into Yellowstone that there was more life there. Even though wolves eat things, there was more life. Some of the trees came back along the riverbanks. The rivers quit meandering as much. Even bears came back. It was wonderful. I happen to love wolves. All right. Couldn't the tree also be a keystone species since all of them depend? Yes, you can consider that to be a keystone species as well. Literally, if you think about it, any one of those things could technically be, but what we find out is the removal of it has caused an ecological breakdown. Yeah, they're very important things. Is keystone species only a secondary consumer? No, they could be almost any one of them. It's just depending on that particular ecosystem. Most times we're going to see them as beavers or, again, my favorite, the wolf and such. But it could be almost anything. All right, so that was all of Unit 1. It was a little bit longer than I expected, but whew, I'm doing good. I was hoping to just do like 15 minutes per one, but I'm a little over. I'm cool with that. In an ecosystem, you're only going to basically see one main species be that keystone. that the removal of it could cause detriment to the rest of it. In which case, if it does survive, a new organism would be considered its keystone. All right, so Unit 2, biodiversity. Oh, gotta crack my neck there. Sorry about that. So there's a couple different forms in biodiversity. Again, bio meaning life, diversity means differences. This is a really good thing. It comes in 3 different flavors. Okay, the first one being genetic, differences in the genes within a species. Species biodiversity, which means there's different species in the ecosystem, and then there's habitat. Again, having different habitats is very beneficial. The reason why you want this diversity is now they're going to have a much more complete food chain. If you're a species diversity, genetic diversity, it kind of goes along with this image that I have right here. It's called the bottleneck effect. You'll notice that when this bottleneck effect occurs, our population drops, which means also the amount of available genes has decreased, and it could cause, catastrophically cause extinction, and there's a possibility of recovery as well. The more differences in your genes, the more evolution can occur, which means, again, your population has a much better chance of survival in that area if something happens. The reason why we need more differences in habitats, basically different ecosystems and biomes, is because different organisms live in different places. And having a wide variety allows us to basically have better nutrient cycling and better chances of recovery if something happens. When we come to, I keep saying, I apologize for that. So species richness and species evenness. I have seen images of this. I tried to recreate it down below here. Looking at it, richness is the number of species in an area, whereas evenness is as a comparison within that area. So if you look at the top half and the bottom half, what we'll notice is that my forest number 1 has a very high richness because it has 3 different types of trees, whereas forest 2 has a lower richness. It only happens to have 2 trees, or 2 types of trees. But when we look at evenness, I calculated the numbers and all that, and by that I mean I calculated how much of each individual tree there were and compared it to the overall. And I noticed that forest number 1 has a lower evenness, whereas forest number 2 has a higher evenness, even by just a couple of tenths. They're, again, a relatively simplistic understanding of even is make sure that they're all pretty close to being the same number. All right, 2.2. These are ecological systems, the services, not systems, that can happen because of different environments. Again, this is why we need that biodiversity. Comes in, again, 4 different flavors. Supporting it's going to support ecosystems, so it helps with the biogeochemical cycles, the formation of soils and habitats, and of course photosynthesis. Without that, there's no more food webs, food chains. Let's go down to regulating. Again, from that's going to control what's going in and out of our ecosystem. So we're going to sequester carbon or release it. Predator prey, even cleaning of water or even air. Trees will do both of those, be able to clean both. Even pest control and disease control. And one of the really important ones right now is natural disaster, being able to absorb the excess amount from a tsunami, or even be able to withstand tornadoes or hurricanes. They're becoming more prevalent and a little bit stronger. What we worry about more, because we're egocentric, the provisions and the cultural ones. So provisions, it provides us water, it provides us with food, hopefully. It says lumber, but you can't have lumber without the raw materials. So I just took it to the next step. If I have these raw materials like the wood, then I can turn that into lumber. You're going to see them basically consider it lumber and not necessarily wood. If you just say gives us wood, we're going to be assuming that it's like a stick or a branch. But if you say it gives us lumber, now we're thinking of that tree has been modified into like a 2x4. Okay. So you do not build houses with wood, you build houses with lumber. And we get that lumber because of trees. So that's I've been a reader for about 4 years, and that's one of the things that they have come back to us on there. Could you say timber? I believe you could say timber. I'm trying to remember, but You're definitely not saying like, you don't build things with sticks. That's one of the biggest points. So don't just say, yeah, it provides that wood. Last but not least is our cultural. That's, again, for us, the aesthetics, education, recreation. All right, you're going to be able to take your sea-doos out on the lake or be able to go camping in the woods. Okay, so ecosystem services. Awesome. This one's really cool. This is 2.3 biogeography, island biogeography. What we noticed, this is from a couple of guys, one of my favorite ones, E.O. Wilson. He kind of figured out that it was size and distance from mainland that would help to determine how many species you have on there. Sorry about that. So if you happen to be nearer to, I keep using my pointer on my screen, but I know you guys can't see it. The top part, if your island is closer to the mainland, you'll tend to have more species there because it's easier for them to get to. On the bottom side, if your island is larger, you also tend to have more because there's more room and there's, again, less competition, less fighting for resources. All right, so just remember that. Near and large will have more. Now, if it's really close and really large, again, there's even more on that. Okay? Okay, ecological tolerance. Basically, this is what we call our Goldilocks zone. So right there is my beautiful little bell curve, okay? And within the middle, that's the optimal range. That's, again, our Goldilocks zone. That's where we have very little stress. That's where we happen to be very happy. The right amount of sunlight, temperature, water. Yes, you can have too much or even too little water. We experienced a flood about 7 years ago. That was a little too much water. So when you start going beyond that optimal level, that's when you start to cause stress. If you don't have nearly as much food, then you start being hungry, not as much water, you get thirsty. Stress can start to cause a decrease in the population because either migration, death, or there's not enough for you to be able to procreate and make that next generation. Now we go into the intolerance zone. You cannot actually handle the level of nutrients or water or whatever this factor happens to be. And that's where your population will just plummet down to the bottom. Okay. Next to nothing can live in the intolerance zone. Alrighty. Whew. All right. 2.7 ecological succession. There's, again, two different types, primary, secondary. What you have to basically know is they're both basically the same. Okay. The whole idea is to reach a stable community. We usually call it the climax community. It's the very end. It's not changing very much. Primary starts with rock. Rock has to be broken down. So our pioneer species, the very first things that move into the area, our pioneers, are going to be moss and lichens. If you pronounce them lichen, then you're wrong. I pronounce them lichen, and since it's my stream, I get to say the rules. So that, neater. But what they're doing is they're breaking down the rock, and as they grow and they die, you can see that we're starting to produce more and more soil down there. This can take well over 1,000 years, okay? If you have an island that springs up all of a sudden, out of nowhere, you are not going to see a lot of life forms within your lifetime. Okay, we have to make that soil in order to make it so that we can get more organisms there. Secondary, what we had was a previous community there. It experienced a disaster, maybe flood, fires, whatever. What's important is we still have soil. And because of that soil, life can come back way, way faster. Okay, so our pioneer species in this case would be like grass or dandelion, some very simplistic, quick growing organisms. You may even find like a small little bush or a little sapling trying to grow in there. Okay, and eventually, again, they both will replace organisms with new ones until they reach that climax. When do you know when the ecosystem reaches climax? That's a good question right there, Carla. What we notice is that, again, there's not a lot of change. If you notice that forest has been there for 20, 30, 40 years, that seems rather stable. Again, grasslands themselves right now, if you look in like Kansas, that's technically stable. We don't have any new organisms coming in. So that's the peak of its area. That will be its climax. So we have to look at it technically over a generation or two in order to see if it's changed or not. Whew, okay, I caught up a little bit more time there. Back on track. Let's talk populations. I'm trying to make it to that unit 4 to make sure that you do really well on your test tomorrow. I'm drinking my hot chocolate, which is now just cold chocolate. All right. Unit 3, populations. This was, again, one of mine. So I kind of technically stole from myself. I'm not sure if I'm supposed to cite myself as my own source. So generalists and specialists. What I just boiled it down to really important things. If I try to make things as easy and simplistic for myself as humanly possible. So a generalist type species, I think of it as like a jack of all trades. They can basically do anything. They live almost anywhere. They don't. They're pretty good at everything, but they're not a master of one thing. So that's what my specialist is. It's that master. It instead of the general contractor, they specialize in something. The niche or niche, I pronounce it both ways. Generalist, it's very broad. Again, they can live lots of different places. You don't really pigeonhole them into one little thing. Whereas a specialist, it can only do specific things, but it does them very, very well. Diet, the generalist is kind of like a buffet, whereas specialist is fine dining. You're ordering that very specific thing, and that's all you eat. You can find generalists throughout the world. Look at the coyote, all over the place. Whereas a specialist, this is my spot, you're on my spot, this is the only place I can be. Sheldon Cooper. I'm sorry, I didn't realize I had questions down here. I do apologize. This is for AP Environmental, although there's a lot of biology in it for us right now. What is a carbon sink and how does it work? Carbon sinks basically just absorb carbon in some format. It could be in a gas form or basically locked up in different molecules, kind of like the trees lock up the carbon in the form of sugar. Is this measured by a specific species or multiple species populations? I'm sorry I didn't get to your question earlier, Alexis. You have to clue me in what we're talking about. Is this measured by specific species or by multiple species? If you'll retype your question, I'll try to answer it real quick for you. So let's keep going here. The specialists and generalists. Oh, for tolerance, that you're going to look at a population. So you're going to look at a specific species in that area. Thank you, Alexis, for tolerance. All right. Again, for tolerance on here. Generalists are very tolerant. So basically, their optimal zone is very large. They can handle lots of different change. Whereas specialists, any little change could, again, their optimal zone is very, very skinny, a much skinnier bell curve right there. Examples, I think of the raccoon, also known as the trash panda, if you watch Guardians of the Galaxy. And the specialist is an actual panda. Raccoons, they'll eat trash, whereas the panda can only eat the bamboo and will only live in one specific area. And that's it. You're not going to find them. You can find them in our zoos, but that's because we asked China very nicely if we can borrow them. Is it that extinct species are special? What we notice is that specialists do become extinct way faster, much more quicker than the generalists, because again, their tolerance level is way smaller. So yeah, we'll notice that. We'll also notice that the generalists happen to be more. They can be more of those invasive species because they can travel. They can basically uproot themselves and go to other places, and it doesn't really affect them as much. So again, your generalist is more can be a invasive species. All right, now K's and R's. Hey, Terrell. K's and R's. I went through this when I did mine, trying to explain what the K and R species are. But again, to boil it down to just the nitty gritty here for you, looking at body size, K species are rather large. R species are quite small. If specialist becomes an invasive species, would they be less of a harm in general? Probably, yeah. Dana, yeah, you're probably gonna. I don't know of any specialists that happen to be in invasives because, again, they're specifics. They need very specific things that happen in order for them to be able to stay alive. So trying to move to a new location, it's too difficult for them to be able to do that. But, yeah, they wouldn't be as great a harm, I don't think. Parenting styles for Ks versus Rs. If you did the bubble lab, I love that one. Is what we do in my class. Ks, I will love you forever. You're the only one for me. Whereas the Rs, kind of like what my parents. Isn't it time for you to go now? We're done with you. Go get. Very, very. It's loving, but just a little bit of love. You don't need a lot. Family size. Your K species are going to have very small families, and it's because, again, they're going to provide a lot for that one or two children, whereas ours, lots of kids, 19 and counting, not to offend anybody that likes the show. I just use them as an example that a very large family. You're not going to get a lot of individual attention there. Competition, Ks are highly competitive. They want that one thing, whereas ours are like, lots of different things. So no problem. So you kind of think of them like generalists and specialists too, in some instances. You'll notice that K species are usually in that ecological succession, primary or secondary. You'll find them to be more of the late stages, whereas the pioneers, early stages, are going to be ours. And of course, my examples are going to be K species. We happen to be K species, elephants, whales, are cows are K species, whereas your R's, almost all your insects, bacteria, technically, even grass is an R species. My favorite example, of course, is the cockroach. Lots of little babies. Okay, survivorship curves. These go back to that K and R species. And if you did the bubble lab, which again, I love it. Are human specialists or generalists? We are very much, I think, a generalist as a species. We're very much very tolerant of lots of different conditions. We're not very picky on what we eat, except for my son, but that's just him. So humans are more of that generalist. Again, we're not really fit most of the models because of our really large brain. We're able to think our way out of things. All right, so our survivorship curves, you'll notice that there's 3 lines on there. Basically, what we're looking at here is looking at different age groups as you go through there. Okay, 3 different curve types. Type 1 curve, you see this labeled on there, are basically our humans. We can last a very long time, won't actually technically die off until late age, so we have a high population in each one of these groups. Okay, majority of them, again, survive to a very late old age. We tend to be K selected. Type 2, your songbirds. Age doesn't really matter to survivability or mortality. You notice again on our line, it's kind of a nice, easy line going down. It doesn't matter how old you are based for your survivability. We kind of technically think of these as click the wrong button again. We kind of technically think of these as more K-related species, though some R's are in there. It's not really a definitive, again, pigeonholing of things. Will type 1 always be K species? As far as I know, yeah. As all the examples that I've seen, all the ones I give to my students, your type 1s are going to be K species. And your type 3s are going to be your R species. Again, lots of kids, all very early age, and then as you go through the rest of the timeline there, usually there's a huge drop down, and very few will make it to that old age. So yeah, we almost always assume that type 1s are going to be K, type 3s are going to be R, and the type 2s, again, it's not everything fits in that 2 category. So there's kind of a blending, a mixing within there, even with the idea of K and R species and specialists and generalists in some locations. Carrying capacity and population growth. So hopefully you guys understand the term S curve and J curve. Basically, this is what we're looking at right on these right here. The carrying capacity is this imaginary line of the amount of nutrients, the amount of materials in an ecosystem. This is what we can handle here. So if your population goes above it, like we see on the second one, if you overshoot how much materials you have, we're going to tend to die off because you don't have enough food, so therefore you can't reproduce. You're going to tend to die off. Your population will continue to go up. When you go below that carrying capacity, then we can see that, hey, now there's extra food or whatever materials, and so you come back up. Is there a type of special species that is both K and R? No, we don't think. Well, they have K tendencies and K and R tendencies. So, they can have a lot more K or a lot more R, but we don't consider them a K and R. It's just, again, it's a blending. It's kind of a spectrum. in which they can lie. So on our S shape, it goes right up to carrying capacity. That's a very ideal system. It doesn't really happen like that. The J portion of the curve is this exponential growth. You can see there's kind of exponential growth on both of them, but one overshoots the carrying capacity. That's what we believe is happening right now with the human population. And the other one will approach and just bottom out on that carrying capacity. Again, what you're understanding here is this is the amount of material within an ecosystem, then going above that, your population will die. Going below it, you can increase your population up to that level. All right, speaking of populations, once again, 3.6 are age structure diagrams. This is what we look at for countries. We usually do this for human populations. The left-hand side is going to be your males. The right-hand side is going to be your females. We use this to kind of gauge growth of the country. Each little bar is usually between 3 and 5 years. And then I color-coded the bars. The very bottom ones are going to be the infants and the adolescents. That middle gray section is reproductive, and then post-reproductive is at the very top. So below teenager to basically 40s and 50s, and then old people at the very top. Again, we can predict growth rates from here. You'll notice that if it's rapidly, it's more of a curved triangle right here. We have a lot more kids at the bottom. When they start reproducing, when they go up, they're going to have more underneath them. The middle one's very stable because there's not a lot of difference between all the little bars on left and right. Whereas the last one, see, it's decreasing. They're having fewer and fewer kids, less often. And so when those kids reproduce, it's going to be even if they have just a few more, you're not going to see an overly large growth in populations. And again, when I talked about the male and females, we can also see corresponding amounts of the two genders right here. My very last one, it didn't matter if it was decreasing or not. I made it so that there was a lot less females on that diagram than were males. What would be the most ideal population for an age structure diagram? It actually depends on what we're going to talk about in a couple of slides. That's the I'll talk about that here in a few slides. It just depends on the country and what's happening, where they are in their demographic transition. So we'll come back to that question here in a minute. What we're hoping for is like the stable one for us, because our human population is expanding so rapidly. We try to keep it. We try to keep it stable. That way you don't have too much expansion. Denise, no, we're not going to go over Unit 5 tonight. I'm barely going to get to Unit 4. So I don't have Unit 5 prepared tonight. I do apologize. I was hoping to, but I don't think we're going to. Here's another one of the... actually, if y'all were good, I would just screenshot this right now. This is one of the formulas that you probably have to work with. The human population growth. Or it doesn't even have to be human, but population growth. CBR is your crude birth rate. So whatever number they have, if they give you a 10, that's basically 10 births per 1,000 people. So crude death rate again is how many deaths per 1,000 people. You take how much population is increasing minus what's leaving, so immigration and death. Divide that by 10. And it's because most of those numbers are already by 1,000 people. So just divided by 10, that's going to give you your population growth rate. And usually it's going to be a decimal. Like even a 5% growth rate is just massive. So you're going to see usually a smaller number. So don't be afraid if you see a small number. What we can use then, why is it divided by 10 again? Because the crude birth and crude death rates are already basically divided by 1,000 people. And so instead of divided by 100 like you would normally for a percentage, we just have to divide by 10. Why would we use the rule of 70 for doubling? That's actually an economic thing that's way above my head. But we noticed that this basically is the amount of years it would take at that approximate growth rate to double your population. Now, the growth rates are constantly changing, but if you just take that 70 divided by whatever your growth rate, that'll tell you how many years it will take to double your population. Okay. So far, the rule of 70, if the growth rate is 3.5%, for example, Is it 70 divided by 3.5 or 0.35? Okay, so yeah, that's actually a really great question. You divide it by 3.5. 70 divided by 3.5. Don't worry about changing that percentage into a decimal. It's already there because you already came up with R is 3.5%. So just take that 3.5 going into 70. How can we change total fertility and replacement and all that? We can change a lot of this through education of women. We put them to schools, make sure that they learn more. If they're basically not sitting in the house having babies, they're outside of the house. Now we can reduce that total fertility rate. If you reduce it too much, you go below replacement level, then that's when that pyramid starts to cave in on itself a little bit, or goes from stable to caving in. Replacement level is 2.1, even though you can't have 0.1 kids. Again, you were looking at the average for everybody there. All right, we're almost done on this one. Here's my demographic transition, going back to that question earlier, like what is the best tree? Well, if you happen to be in stage 1 right here, you'll notice that you have a very high birth rate, but also a high death rate, which makes your population low. We're not having a lot of growth. Okay, so you can see that is a very, very triangular population. Now going into stage 2, yeah, basically this is starting to be industrial. We're starting to get better medicine, so our birth rate is still high, but our death rate is going down because, hey, we're taking better care of ourselves. So that starts the increase of our human population. When we get to stage 3, we are more of a stage 4. There is a stage 5 if you go into another human geography and stuff like that. We used to go with the 4 stages. So in stage 3, what we're looking at is the birth rate starting to go down because we're working a lot more. We're definitely into like an industrial type system, and again our death rate is going down. So by the end of stage 3, even though our population is climbing, that's starting to stabilize, and that's where it gets us to our stage 4, post-industrial. We're too busy having to have kids, so we're doing jobs, so we tend not to have a large population growth, although we can still have a large population because we're not dying as much. We're taking way better care of ourselves. All right, so that right there is the end of Unit 3. Last but not least, Unit 4. So are you guys still with me? Please tell me you are. Am I being helpful? Are you learning something? Are you remembering things today? Sorry for the styrofoam. I need my cherry slushy. All right. Definitely taking notes. Excellent. Take screenshots too, y'all. Help yourselves out. All right. So Unit 4, Earth Systems and Resources. This is one I just finished. In fact, my students are taking a test over it tomorrow. Aren't they lucky? All right. Let's start with this. Plate tectonics. Here are all the plates on our planet. They are very large chunks of our crust, and they're constantly moving, even though we don't feel them, they are. So think of like the San Andreas Fault. So they can move in 3 different ways. Divergent, they're pulling apart. To converge means to come together. Normally, they're not going to buckle up. They're going to have one slides underneath the other. And because of that slide, you're starting to push up. Then there's the last one is transform. So put my hands together right here. They're starting to slide. This is actually our San Andreas Fault when it's sliding. So the arrows on there kind of show that. You don't have to think about, you don't have to actually know, which way they're moving. But if you happen to see valleys, that would be divergent. If you happen to see mountains, that's convergent. If you notice that California slid into Canada, that's transform. We talk about the Ring of Fire. That is that very large, yellowish one on our left-hand side. Where these plates combine or divide or whatever, you're going to see there happens to be what we call hotspots. Weakened areas, volcanoes, earthquakes, and stuff like that. Would it be necessary to know the regions and which plate types are where? No, I don't think you really need to. You just have to know how they move, why they move, and what's the result of the movement. Again, volcanoes, earthquakes, and all that. How exactly do you know if a plate no longer exists? Actually, they're constantly being when you subduct, go underneath, it's going to melt, and it's going to basically that material is going to pop up somewhere else where it was dividing. So the plates are constantly being destroyed and rebuilt, but slowly over time. How do we define the area, etc., of a plate? Big, not big, and tiny. if they give you the numbers, you should be able to kind of roughly map it out. But I haven't seen anybody do that. Doesn't mean it's not possible, but they would have to give you some numbers and basically just kind of put it into squares, find the area of all that is what I would do. Alrighty, soil formation. Very important, especially when we're talking about ecological succession earlier. When we had that bedrock, that very bottom R, it's going to have to be broken up in order to make our soil. And so you'll see the left-hand side, this is all the factors that go into it. The climate, if it's an area, if it's moist, windy, organisms are going to be involved, like our lichens and our moss. How much time is involved? What type of material is there? Limestone breaks up way faster than granite. Relief is looking at vertical and horizontal area of this rock. So when that bedrock is broken down, we have what's called the sea horizon or the substratum. It's as close to the parent material, but has, again, a little bit of that soilness into it. On top of that is our B, our subsoil. You notice the majority of our roots for our plants are growing down into that. Then you have A, our surface. You don't always have to have an O, the organic level. That's one of the easier ones for me. Remember, O means organic. That's kind of like humus, not the dip hummus, but the other form, which is basically broken down like leaves and such. What we're missing on here is the E. In between the A and the B, you can have an E horizon where you have this leaching of materials that are there. We don't always have it. So if you ever see an E, it's between the A and the B. Again, the leaching of materials. But for the most part, it's going to be O, A, B, C. Is the A horizon also called topsoil? Yes, it is called topsoil. All right, the surface layer is called topsoil. Organic doesn't always have to be there, but you're going to have that A, that topsoil. That's the newest form of our soil. Is there a way to remember the order of horizons? Actually, yeah, A, B, C. And then you can have O on top, and then you have your bedrock. And just ignore that E there. That one's just the weirdo inside of it. So yeah, it's very alphabetical. It's one of the few things that actually does that. I wish my Facebook friends would quit talking so much. That's what you guys keep hearing. All right. Oh, thank you. Only apes eat banana cupcakes regularly. That's a brilliant one to use. Thank you so much. I try to use funny things, but I just went alphabetical on mine. All right, let's keep going. Soil pyramid. This is our texture pyramid because this is one of the properties of soil. Looking at the sizes, sand is absolutely large. Then we go to silt. You don't have to memorize the actual specific sizes. Just have to know that sand is very large. Silt is way tiny, and then clay is literally microscopic. And because of those, we can look at the water holding capacity because of the porosity, or basically the pore size. Sand being very large and irregular shape can have very large holes around it. Think of like a whole tub of balls that you find at Walmart during Christmas time. There's lots of space in them because of the size of our sand. Water can get easily in between those holes and drain right through. Silt being much smaller, it takes a while, kind of like the mud that I have in my backyard every so often. Now, when we come to clay, because the particles are so small, they're very close together. There's not a lot of space in between them. Water can't get in them. That's why we make clay pots and not sand pots for our plants here. When looking at the soil triangle, again, they'll give you usually two of the percentages. You'd have to find the third. Even if you just have the two, you don't need the third because they'll all add up to 100%. Start off with whichever one they give you. Most times I tend to give my students clay first. And you notice that it goes from the bottom left-hand side up to the middle. And these lines are going to go basically straight. Now, when you come to the silt, you're going to go down at an angle towards the sand, and then the sand is going to come up towards clay. So what you're looking at is a clockwise rotation of these numbers. And again, what we're showing is the rough percentages of the materials, sand, silt, and clay. You will see a funny little word on there, loam. The absolute best material to grow your plants in is a form of loam. And it's because it has the best combination of water retention and drainage. It doesn't hold onto it so much that you rot your leaves or your roots, but it does hold onto it enough. So what would we have to, in this case, memorize? You just have to make sure you understand how to read that triangle. And I would just think about, again, the sizes of our particles. As a lake, what is the best particle type for groundwater recharge? You probably want something that's a little bit more silt. If you want to be able to recharge, so the water can tongue-tied. Water can drain down through that lake. So we want to have a little bit of clay in order to hold it, or else you won't have a lake. But you're still going to have some of that silt to let the water slowly drain down into your groundwater, where it can, as it goes draining down, it will clean out hopefully some of the toxins, some of the pollution. Excellent questions. Thank you so much. Let's keep going right here. Earth's atmosphere. Again, the majority of our atmosphere is nitrogen, followed by oxygen, and then a whole bunch of trace low materials. If you don't know it already, here is our lovely spheres, our troposphere, stratosphere, mesosphere, and thermosphere. And I do have a little mnemonic for this one. Tiny soldiers make tents expertly. All right. Yes, definitely memorize this one. The troposphere itself is, I see what you did there. My bad. So the troposphere is where life occurs, whether most of our clouds are sitting in there. And then as you go between the troposphere and the mesosphere, we have what's called the tropopods. There is a slight change in, or a combination of characteristics. Notice that our temperature will decrease as you go up. It gets colder as you go up. You know that. Have you ever been to Denver versus the coast? Once we get into the stratosphere, it will start to increase its temperature. This is where we also have our ozone, because of absorbing that solar radiation. It starts to get a little bit warmer in the stratosphere, where we send up our weather balloons. Again, now we have another little pause, the stratopause. Again, a blending of conditions here. And now our mesosphere, again, is starting to decrease temperature quite rapidly as you go up. You're going to see most of your shooting star here. Mesosphere is really boring. There's like next to nothing that happens here, okay? Except for like shooting stars. Your meteors are going to burn up because there's just enough particles. There's just enough oxygen and nitrogen, all the little things that make up our atmosphere. Just barely enough to actually start friction to burn them up. And then once you hit that mesopause, you're going to start going into the thermosphere. Some people also have an extra layer above that called the exosphere. The thermosphere itself is where you're going to see the auroras, both the north and the south aurora, all those pretty lights. This is where we send our satellites. This is technically where the ISS is located right now, International Space Station. It can extend quite a long ways. We think of it as the end of our atmosphere. Possibly the exosphere is the end of it, but it's so thin. It actually extends like halfway out between us and our moon. But there really isn't any particles out there. You're definitely not going to be able to breathe. Whew, okay. We are so much wrapping this up really, really quickly. Global wind patterns. You'll notice because of the funny little shape of our planet being round, it can't really travel straight. And because it keeps turning, our winds have a funny little twist to them too. We call this the Coriolis effect. You can see it at the bottom. Actually, you can kind of see it on the right-hand side too. Because of our twisting Earth, if you're trying to go from the North Pole down to the equator, it will rotate clockwise. If you go from the South Pole to the equator, it will rotate again counterclockwise. Okay, why is the direction of the cell so important? This is where, again, this is where you're going to see some of our, like with our Hadley cells here in a second. That's how we can actually transport nutrients and minerals from one place to the other. We actually will see that there's sand from Africa here in the U.S. We can actually do like little diagnostic tests on it. And this also helps the global water patterns actually help to push some of the wind patterns and vice versa. Just knowing it is so that you can understand, again, some of our biomes here. So if you look here, I'm going to talk about these Hadley cells right here. As you have cool air, I'm going to look at the convection current. As you have hot air, it rises. As it rises, it's going to start to cool and expand. We call that adiabatic cooling. When it does that, when it expands and cools, you have lots of rain. So at 0 degrees and just beyond that, this is where you have most of your rainforest at the equator. Now, at the top, it starts to fall back down. And as it's falling, it starts to warm up. It's very dry right now. There's no moisture in it. It already rained. So now we have this cool air falling down. And as it falls down closer to the surface, we have adiabatic heating. So it's warming up and it will rush back to the equator. And again, we repeat this convection current. That first one at 0 degrees, our equator, is our Hadley cell. Again, where we see most of our biomes happens to be within that 0 degrees, that equator section. Where do we find a lot of our deserts? Even if you look on the image that we have right here, you can see them where that warm, dry air falls at the top of Africa, the southern tip of Africa, 30 degrees north, 30 degrees south. And it will repeat again at 6 degrees north, 6 degrees south. That warm air rises, falls at 30 and 90 and goes back in. Guess where Seattle's located? Very close to that 6 degrees north. Again, we're going to have that what we call our temperate rainforest. All right. Alrighty then. Ooh, I'm going a little bit over. I'm trying to go quickly. I'm sorry. Watersheds. Basically, just think of this as an area, a section of land that collects water and drains it to a localized area. It's determined by soil type. If it's clay, it's going to rush faster. How long it is, the area. So if a little skinny area, it won't collect near as much as a very large area. Even vegetation type, lots of trees in the way, it's going to slow everything down. Aquifer happens to be an area underground that stores water. It can be through percolation, basically infiltration. It soaks down into the soil and it collects in that area. The Edwards Aquifer is the one that is rather commonly discussed. And it is recharged by the watersheds. If humans never found aquifers, what would happen naturally? We would only be able to drink the water that's in lakes and streams. That aquifers would never be touched, technically, if we never found them. All right, this is the reason why we have the reason for the season. Our planet is not straight up and down. It is tilted at 25.3 degrees or 23.5 degrees. I'm not sure if you have to memorize that, but I have it. I used to teach 7th grade science a very long time ago. Because of that tilt, we have uneven heating of our planet. And when my little lines are messed up. What's the difference between aquifers and the water table? Aquifer usually is technically water that's kind of trapped within a cave, whereas the water table could be the aquifer, but it's mostly water that's trapped within soil. Again, with solar radiation, because of the uneven heating, our planet is constantly going around the sun, and it's always tilted in one direction. And so this is what gives us your seasons. If the North Pole is pointed towards the sun, more direct sunlight, that's our summers. The southern hemisphere, it has less direct sunlight, kind of bounces, it just slides off of it. So that's going to be the winter. However, if we go to the opposite side now the southern South Pole is pointed towards the sun, more direct light, and the top is going to have wintertime because the light is basically just brushing off of it. Whew. Okay, geography and climate. Believe me, ladies and gentlemen, this is like the last slide right here, last piece of information. Geography can change your climate entirely. What we're looking at here is our we have this mountain rain shadow. Again, that warm, moist air rises. It will all the rain will fall on the windward side of our mountain, and as it goes over, there's no rain whatsoever, and it starts to fall back down and warm up. So dry, warm air falls back down here, and so this is where you see lots of, on one side of the mountain you have lots of rain, but on the leeward side it's more grasslands and deserts. Think Nevada. It's on one side of the mountains where it doesn't get that much rain. Ocean currents help to drive wind forces as well. If you'll notice that lovely little circle right between North America, Africa, and Europe, it starts to warm up. So we have warm winds because of the warm ocean. England's not supposed to be warm whatsoever. If you look at its latitude, it's supposed to be cold, like severely cold. But because of that warm water pushing warm winds up towards them, they get to be a lot warmer. They're also going to see a lot more rain. And you also notice that's the reason why, again, one of the reasons why we're looking at this right here. You can see most of our hurricanes are going to come from Africa right up to the East Coast right there. Okay, what's the difference between El Nino and La Nina? I don't have that one on here. I'm sorry, I don't have that here. So basically, it is looking at the very western portion of the U.S. and South America. You're going to see differences in the way the natural occurrence of the oceans are going. So with the El Nino, instead of the oceans pushing the air away, it's going to actually come towards us. We will experience a lot more rains because of the El Nino. They happen they can last between 2 to 7 years. Now, when we get more rains on the East Coast, on the West Coast, like with California, that rain had to come from somewhere. So it's pulling the moisture away from Australia and the Philippines. Whereas in La Nina, you reverse that and it's pushing more. So it's drawing more of our moisture away from us. We get more drought-like conditions, but Australia and the Philippines and Japan, they're going to have more rain, flood-like conditions. Whew, okay. Ladies and gentlemen, that's the end of mine. It was a marathon. I appreciate y'all sticking to the end. I'm hoping I helped you. I hope I answered as many questions and as all the questions I could. I do hope you do very well on your finals. And for those of you that are taking the test tomorrow, good luck. Hopefully this is beneficial to you. Again, we're going to start. I'm going to have more. All of us will be here starting up our new sessions, our new streams here very shortly in the future. So after the Christmas break, after the holiday break, I hope you guys do wonderful. Am I going to do other live other units? Yeah, we all sign up for different ones. We take turns. That way you don't have to just stare at one of our faces. You get to stare at a lot of our faces. I appreciate y'all. Don't forget us. Of course, we are at Think Fiveable. Take care. Love you. See ya. Bye. Can I breathe? I don't think I breathed the whole time.